One. Hello, I'm Mike Bird. Welcome to the Seven Things podcast, where we talk about seven things about the Bible it's useful for Christians to know. Today, we're going to talk about why background information, historical background, literary background, cultural background, knowing some of that is actually a helpful tool to help you understand more of the Bible. And I'm not doing this alone. Today, I'm joined with Dr. Lyn Kidson from Alpha Crucis College in Sydney. I'm talking to Lyn from home, as we're both currently in lockdown in different cities for different reasons. But we're nonetheless united by technology and spirit, and also united by our common belief that knowing something about historical backgrounds or ancient context actually illuminates the world of the New Testament. So, Lyn, can you tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you do in New Testament studies?
Yes, well, I lecture in New Testament at Alpha Crucis College, which is a college that we do a number of academic broad. We're trying to be a university, so it's quite broad. So it's incorporated in that broad offering is theology, and I lecture in New Testament. I became a New Testament lecturer because I did a Masters of Early Christian and Jewish Studies at Macquarie University. And then I went on to do a PhD in 1 Timothy, and that was essentially ancient history qualification. But I also have a Master's of Divinity from Sydney Missionary Bible College. And so I have a foot in both camps. I'm both an ancient historian and a New Testament scholar.
Okay, so also, I mean, it sounds like a good sort of training regime to get ready to delve into the historical world of the Apostle Paul and the Areopagus, or Jesus in Judea. Not far from
Yes,
the Dead Sea, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were filled.
that's
I was
right.
going to say, Lyn, I mean, first of all, why do we need to know about historical background? Is there any particular reason why this can be helpful?
Yes, because, well, to start with, the New Testament is written in Greek. It's a it's a different language to English, and the way people thought about their world when they were writing their Greek in the first century is vastly different, and they come from a vastly different world to us in the 21st century. So to understand what they're saying, and because sometimes things are rather cryptic, you've got to kind of fill in the gaps, but you can't fill in the gaps unless you know a little bit about what's going on, apart from the fact that you need to um, study Greek to be able to read the original text, which is like an ancient language that people don't write and speak anymore. So you need to, you just need to rely on um, your, what you can know from ancient history, and philologists and people like that who specialize in language, and yeah, that's
Yeah, I mean,
why.
yeah, exactly. I mean, we wouldn't be able to translate the words of the Greek New Testament unless we had people who went back and understood the meaning of ancient Greek words and all the different words. And, what a word means in one context, it might mean something different in another context,
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. And just the study of another language is a study of that the culture that those people are who are native speakers are living in. So if you were to go and study French, I have a friend who teaches French, and that just involves teaching people who want to speak French about French culture, because you can't understand the language unless you know about French culture. So the
Exactly.
same with studying Greek New Testament and reading Greek. You can't know what being said without understanding the culture of the native speakers who have written stuff down.
Yeah. So the science of lexicography may sound very nerdy, very highbrow,
Well, it is.
It
Let's
is, you
face
know,
it.
people, but if it wasn't for, which is how they understand the meaning of words. I mean,
That's
lexicography
right.
just means, the art of making dictionaries. So
Yeah.
making dictionaries of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek and Latin, everything may sound very tedious and boring, but without it,
Mm,
you wouldn't even have an English Bible because we
that's
need
right.
those lexicons and lexicographers to help us do kind of stuff
Yes.
like that. And
Bless
yeah,
their hearts.
bless their hearts indeed. I once accidentally stepped into a room for a biblical studies meeting, and I thought I was there for the interpretation of Paul's letters, but it was actually an Aramaic lexicography session. And by the time I realized what it was, the room was packed and I couldn't actually get out. So I was stuck for about an hour and a half listening to Aramaic lexicography. I'll
That-
be honest, I did learn some things, but I didn't learn anything I found particularly useful at the time.
oh,
But I did
yes.
learn some stuff. I did
Yeah,
learn some
that's
stuff.
right.
Wasn't immediately
Well,
useful.
at
So
Macquarie University, and I have no, is Trevor Evans, who is a lexicographer, um, foremost in the Greek Septuagint, which is the translation of the Old Testament into Greek. And he was trying very slowly to put together a lexicon that relates to the Septuagint. So a lot of my work that I did for my thesis was built on the method that Trevor described to me.
yeah. Well, I mean,
And that's why I was romping around in the papyrus that's from Egypt.
yeah.
And that's been one of the most amazing discoveries in the last 100 odd years.
Okay. Well, that's two things we can focus on there in terms of background. One thing is the Septuagint, which is something a lot of Christians don't know about. That is the Greek
Yes.
translation of the Old Testament. Now, in the ancient world, obviously you've got the Jewish people with their Hebrew Bible, the Bible in Hebrew. But 80% of Jews lived outside of Palestine, and for a large number of them, their main language was Greek. And so eventually people began translating the Bible into Greek for use by Greek speaking communities in places like Egypt or
Mm,
Ephesus or, other parts of the ancient world.
yes.
And the Septuagint was largely the Bible of the apostles.
Mm,
The book of Hebrews is made up about of 25% of quotations from the Septuagint.
yes.
And, Paul seems to be quoting from the Septuagint. And in some cases, specific Septuagintalisms appear to influence the New Testament. For example, I don't know whether you know this, Lynn, but in Romans 4, Paul links together Genesis 15:6. Abraham believed God and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. He also combines Psalm 32:2, which says, "Blessed is the man whose sins are not reckoned to him." Now, that's a very Jewish thing where you bring two texts together because they've got a similar word. And in
Mm,
Greek, it's the word legizomai for count, credit, or reckon. But here's the funny thing. They've only got a similar word in the Greek. They don't have a similar word in the Hebrew. So he's doing a kind of Jewish interpretation that's depending on the fact that he's got two Greek texts in front of him. I guess the other little Septuagint, tidbit I give is when James quotes from the book of Amos in Acts 15 at the Jerusalem Council. He quotes from the Septuagintal version, which talks about how the nations will be gathered, under the house of David, and they'll be kind of united together, that type of thing, which is a little bit of a different rendering from you get in the Hebrew text. It's a
yes.
little bit, or the Septuagint kind of translates it and interpret it a little bit more in a way that's more friendly and open to the Gentiles. So yeah, I mean, Septuagint studies is a big, interesting area that a lot of people may not be aware of.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the big, like, aha moments I had that you, your viewers might like. Just this basic thing, like, oh, why do the quotations in the New Testament differ from the how it's quoted in the how it reads in the Old Testament? And that's the reason why, is because um, the New Testament authors are quoting from the Greek Septuagint. They're not quoting directly from the Hebrew.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes the Septuagint could be a little bit almost paraphrastic or a bit of a gloss. It's interesting. Sometimes the Septuagint translators are translating stuff in the Hebrew, and they have no idea what the original Hebrew word was. Particularly some of the names of animals. It's like you get the feeling they got no idea what the animal. What the heck is that animal? Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's probably some sort of maybe Babylonian loan word for some sort of furry critter.
Yeah.
So they just kind of make one up. So there's some interesting stuff in the Septuagint. But you also mentioned, Lynn, papyri from Egypt.
Yes.
So, and you're not talking about stuff necessarily from the time of the pharaohs and all that. You're talking more about
No.
the Roman Egypt. What can you tell us? What's been dug up out of Egypt that might be of interest to certain Christians?
Yeah. Oh, just not in the Roman period, but extend back into the Hellenistic period. So this is why the background of the Bible helps. And you know what? I reckon it would be a good idea if we actually did squash in between the two testaments some of the intertestamental literature, so you get the idea that Jewish people did continue to write about stuff.
You mean the Apocrypha?
In brackets. Could we have just like little brackets?
Well,
So you got
interestingly,
the idea that stuff happened, and it would be a good idea if we actually knew that in between Malachi and
Matthew.
Matthew, yes. A really important thing happened, and that really important thing is called Alexander the Great, who romped around conquering most of the
Is romp around the term
Mediterranean.
historians used?
Yeah, it's a technical word. And that's why everyone's speaking Greek, right? That's why the New Testament is written in Greek, because it's the lingua franca of the eastern half of the Mediterranean for hundreds of years, including in the Roman period. So this is why it's really interesting about the papyrus from Egypt. Now, it was discovered. There's I don't know what came first. I think it might have been the crocodiles first. They discovered these embalmed, mummified crocodiles in Septuagint in these paper mache cases. It's basically what they are, cartouches. And they found they could get them to come apart. And there were these whole documents with all the writing on them. They just they'd clear out the record house, just have a big chuck out, and the priests would use that to build these cartouches that would go in, like you embalm the crocodile. So Septuagint is God was the crocodile, so that's why they're doing it. And they kind of kept them as kind of pets, sacred pets. And then when they died, they embalmed them. And then you embalm crocodile in the cartouche, or it could be a human being. And then that would go inside the sarcophagus, right? So if you imagine if you've seen Tutankhamun, he's got his bandages on, but then he's in this kind of case. So they pull them all apart, and they were all these documents, and they're mostly like administrative documents because they came from like the record house. And then I think that was the one that came first. This is Grenfell and Hunt and the British Egypt Exploration Society. And then this is at the very, very end of the 19th century, but it continued on into the early part of the 20th century. Then they went, I think that this is the sequence, and then they went to Oxyrhynchus, where they discovered a rubbish dump. And in the rubbish dump was, because it's out in the desert, was all these preserved documents.
Papyrus,
so
yeah.
yes,
and thousands
and they
of
were
them.
there. And they were, the exciting thing is, Mike, they were just letters from and memorandums and all that kind of petitions by ordinary people in their course of business. You know how you write a little note? Oh, there they were. Just, and you can see inside you get an idea of inside their lives and what they were thinking and what kind of business they were doing and their love lives and all that kind of amazing stuff. And there is masses and masses of this stuff that the British Museum has been working through for 100 years, and they're still not through all the boxes.
It's done some amazing stuff there. I remember there was a letter from a husband to his wife just talking about what he's up to on business. And he says, oh, yeah, by the way, I know you're pregnant. If you have a daughter, cast it out.
Yes, that's
if you have a girl, just take it out to live nowhere. Just leave it there. Stuff.
Yeah, we don't quite know how all that worked, actually. So we shouldn't jump to too great conclusions. They might have had like drop-off points, like recycling.
Oh.
Because there seemed to be because somehow they had to feed the the market for slaves. So some people have suggested maybe that's where the slave market got.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think people went out looking for foundlings and would then raise them.
Yeah, that's foundlings. Yeah. So we have documentation about the foundlings, and they actually mentioned in Pliny the Younger's administrative letters from Bithynia to the emperor in the early 2nd century. Problem with the foundlings. So, and then they're mentioned in like documents and stuff as well.
Well, so that's an interesting case. In the papyri, we also get, I mean, not just business letters and petitions. You also get a few fragments of the New Testament. We also get fragments of like the Gospel of Thomas in Greek. So there's a big wealth of information, and some of it can help illuminate what ordinary life was like in the ancient world, ranging from, marriage proposals to business contracts to all sorts of things.
Yeah. And the kind of literature people were reading. So Homer's a steadfast favorite. He was like the basis of Greek education. So if you kind of stumped on what's going on, sometimes just looking at Homer, because everyone knew Homer because you wrote him out as one of the first exercises, when you were learning to write.
We should add, that's not Homer Simpson. That's Homer.
No, it's, it's the
great
Iliad
epic writer.
Yeah, and the Odyssey. Yeah. Yep.
Those things. Because when I tell my students Homer, they think, what, Simpson? No.
Yeah.
Surely not.
That's right.
Well, let me ask you, Lynn, what would you say are the top, say 2 or 3 resources someone could read or get into if they wanted to, learn a little bit of ancient background that might help them in their own reading of, say, the New Testament?
Oh, yes, there's. Oh, wish you had asked me before. There is the series that comes out of Macquarie University. So Mark Harding and Alana Nobbs. This is one of them.
That's called
Into All the World. Alana was my supervisor. These kind of this series, condenses all that we were just talking about, those humongous kind of topics into nice, neat little chapters, and that's the way of getting into it. But also, there's a massive series called from Macquarie University as well. New documents illustrating early Christianity. There's like up to 10 volumes of that. The earlier ones are a bit hard to get. I haven't been able to get on number 1 yet. But the later volumes,
and 9, 10,
11, 9, 10, haven't got to 11 yet, I don't think.
They're a fantastic read. They're a fantastic read because they go often through those papyri or inscriptions.
Inscriptions, yes.
Or stuff that people have graved on a wall somewhere. And
That's
they go through
graffiti, yes.
Yeah, and then they then kind of explain how it has relevance to understanding the New Testament. So, yeah, if you want to get yourself a good little gift to self, the New Documents Illustrating Early Christianity, is a great way to.
And they're really short and sweet, and it's kind of all packaged up. So it's not too much reading, and just the tiny little chapters they are. So you don't have to read all through them. You just pick one that might interest you, and or you can use the index to find something that might be relevant to one of the New Testament letters that or books that you're looking at.
Okay, besides the new documents illustrating early Christianity, do you have another favorite resource that maybe readers could be directed to?
There's some really old work that has been done that is now just archived. So, which is really interesting. So at the beginning of again, at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century, there was William Ramsey, who again was romping around
Like Alexander the Great.
Covering a lot of the same territory in Anatolia, which is Turkey, modern day Turkey, and he was looking at inscriptions. So people in the ancient world love to set up inscriptions. So so there's funerary epitaphs. So they would actually sometimes outline a lot about a person's life. But also, if you were to honour someone, you would set up a stele and outline why you're honouring them, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So you can find cities and bishoprics of Phrygia, which Phrygia is where Colossae, Laodicea and Hierapolis are. And in that book, he discusses, it's not quite the New Testament, but it's the very first early churches after the New Testament era he's looking at, kind of in that period there. Because that's when Christians you start to see Christians appearing in the epigraphical record. There's enough of them, and that's the same with the papyrus. You start to see Christians appearing in about I think it's about the 3rd century, really see them, because there's enough of them, right, for the material. Enough material is being produced to be preserved. So that's one of the issues we have with archaeological material, is that getting enough preserved material, and some of this stuff is just random. We know stuff didn't make it. So Eusebius talks about Papyrus, who was a church historian from the 2nd century, I think, but that book didn't survive. So there's all these materials that we know that was out there, but didn't survive.
So William Ramsey was one of the first people to make records of the various inscriptions out in the East, in modern day Turkey. Funeral inscriptions or public declarations. Where they, I think the most famous one would be the Priene inscription, where one particular town or group of towns is celebrating the birthday of Augustus, the Roman emperor,
right.
And they're talking about the good news, the Evangelia,
it's the good news,
the good news of his accession and rise to power. And that's kind of like the gods have given us all these blessings, including Augustus, and we'll keep celebrating his reign and his rule and honoring him for all the good things he's done for us. So so all those inscriptions, but we've known back.
And it's like Luke is singing from the same hymn sheet.
Yes. So he's certainly immersed in that kind of world and is using the same language. So the way Luke sets up, his gospel in chapter 2, talking about, the 14th year of Tiberius and all these things happen. He's certainly got a clear connection to that world of literature and papyrus and inscriptions.
That's right. And the conventions, and that's the thing, that's the exciting thing. The conventions are how you say this stuff. So you learn about the conventions in the papyrus, how people address each other, and how you set out a letter in the papyrus letters, how you might petition someone, conventions there. Also, how you laud someone in from the inscriptions, all those sorts of things just then find their way into the New Testament because that's the language that they're using. Because what else would you say? Because that's a part of the culture. That's how you say stuff.
Yeah.
And that gives us insight then, because once you start to understand the background, what's expected, what's normal, then you can see, and this is the interesting thing with that Perini inscription we're talking about, how Luke then takes that kind of convention and then subverts it.
Yeah, it does
And that's why
something
I get
differently.
really
Yeah.
excited, because you can start to see how this works, and then you go, oh, look what they're doing there. Oh, what he's doing now.
Yeah, he's taking the language they used to describe the emperor,
Yes,
and he's applying it
applying it
to Jesus.
to Jesus. That's right. Or
Ah,
and sometimes to God. So God is in 1 Timothy. God is king. Um,
yeah, excellent,
it's
excellent stuff.
it just like, but all those kinds of epitaphs that we get in 1 Timothy normally apply to the emperor.
Yeah,
But no, says the row of 1 Timothy, they belong to God,
yeah,
who's invisible and all of that.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say that
Yahweh, it's the Jewish God.
yeah. Well, the two favorite sources I like to refer students to are the Dead Sea Scrolls. You can pick up a copy of them for about $10
That's
down in
right.
your local bookstore, and they're very useful. Everything you get kind of like biblical commentaries, some of them more like monastic rules for how to run a society. Liturgies are what the kind of worship they think the angels do in heaven.
Yes.
Also some peculiar figures who they think are going to be exalted to the heavens, like some figure called Melchizedek, who's probably an angel, or maybe a stand-in for the
Yes.
archangel Michael.
So that's right. Angelology is a really important feature of Jewish culture and Jewish thought. So that's the insight that you get from that. And yeah, I would say when you're reading a Dead Sea Scrolls, you should have beside you a copy of 1 Maccabees and Josephus as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I love
Fill
my
in, either
Josephus.
color in that in between bit.
Yeah, no, it's very useful. You'll find these sources do overlap, and when you read, like if you read like 1 or 2 Maccabees, which is about the uprising against the Syrian rulers of Judea in the period after Alexander the Great, but
Yes,
before the Roman domination of Judea and before Jesus. So reading 1 and 2 Maccabees is very illuminating for debates about the law, about how much can you participate in Greek culture without being an apostate, Jew, that kind of thing. And yeah, so that's all
and
excellent.
why nationalism is such a hot topic in the Gospels. Why you have these huge like people, why such a huge emphasis on nationalism? Well, that's because up until very recently, just before the Jesus appears on the scene, like Jewish people were kind of independent. It was an oligarchy, but they were sort of masters, captains of their own fate. But then the Romans come,
Yeah,
and then Herod comes. Hey,
yeah,
they just absolutely despise. So that's what you get if you read Josephus. Um,
yeah. So Josephus
yeah.
is a Jewish historian
Mm.
who was a general fighting in the rebellion against Rome, 66 to 70 A.D. When he gets captured, rather than commit suicide, he decides to switch sides and actually becomes a very useful member of the staff of General
Mm.
Vespasian and Titus, and Vespasian even gets to become the emperor. So he kind of backed the right horse, but then he writes his history of the Judean War afterwards, and then he also writes his own Antiquity of the Jews. Now, the Antiquity of
Yes.
Jews is a bit of it like a rewriting of the Bible, kind of like the the Reader's Digest version of the Old Testament.
That's right.
But then he also adds all the intertestamental stuff and
Mm.
everything up until nearly about the end of the first century. And he describes what was going on historically and what he thinks was happening theologically. I mean, Josephus argues that God has gone over to the side of the Romans, and Vespasian is also
Yes.
the Messiah, the ruler from the east that God has promised would arise. So he applies a lot of
Mm.
messianic language to
That's
Vespasian.
right. So Josephus says that he had a kind of revelation or a vision that Vespasian was going to be the ruler, because at that stage he was just when he was besieging Jerusalem. Oh well, fighting the war against the rebels in Judea. He was just a general. But yeah, Josephus has like this vision, revelation that he's going to be emperor. And lo and behold, he does.
It does
Lucky for
happen,
him.
and it happens. Yeah, yeah. Which is a good idea to keep him alive.
Yeah.
And he ends up making himself quite invaluable to
Yes.
what would be called the Flavian regime, at least in their affairs in finishing
Yes.
the
But he
war.
has to go and live in Rome because he can't live
No
anymore.
one, nobody, nobody likes a Benjamin Franklin.
No.
Nobody likes a Benjamin Franklin, someone
No.
who betrays the course and
Yes.
goes over to the other side.
And this is another thing I'd like to push into about the visions and stuff, because it's a really important thing. For ancient people is this kind of connection with the supernatural, with the gods or with God. If you happen to be a Jew or become a follower of Jesus, because if you read Acts, like it's packed, jam packed full of visions and dreams and things, right?
Yeah.
And it's part of the persuasiveness of Luke's case that God is on the Christian side, that they've got it right, because the mission is guided by God himself through these visions and dreams and stuff, which people in the ancient world would expect. Like, it's persuasive that that you've had these revelations from a supernatural source, and then you can just say who that supernatural source is. So ancient people would think that it should be these things called daemons, which can be good or bad. So they're kind of like angels, which come from like the divine realm to earth to give you messages. But not so. It's a direct message from God himself to Paul or Abacus, or other people in Acts. So, and we know that about the ordinary people is because this is one of the things I use the inscriptions for, because there's a whole bunch of inscriptions called confessions inscriptions from that were found in Turkey, where people say, "Oh, I had a vision or a dream of, God, and they commanded me to do X." Or I was struck blind. Does this sound familiar? I was struck blind by the God, and then they told me what I'd done wrong, and then what I had to do to make up for the thing that I'd done wrong, and then I regained my sight or my vision. Does this sound kind of familiar? It's like Paul, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But he doesn't have to make amends in any way. And that's the thing that says the striking thing in 1 Timothy is that he says, by the mercy of God, I was called into service, and he didn't have to do anything because it's by grace, right? And for a first century person, that's dynamite. That's amazing, because they would expect that being struck blind or having some sort of kind of supernatural punishment like that is a punishment. but Paul doesn't talk about it like that. You know, it's not talked about like that in Acts or in Galatians or anything. It's this, for him, it's like it's a discipline thing. You know, it's discipline, correction back onto the, you know, into the way, back into service with God. So people from you, what the impression that you get from these inscriptions, that people were very afraid of the gods. You know, they could strike you down, or strike your family down, and you don't even know why. You had to go and get, you know, to an oracle and find out the reason why. But for Paul, you know, he sees Jesus, and Jesus tells him what's going on straight away. You know, he doesn't have to go see a special oracle or anything.
So it's
So
good.
it's grace.
So
This is how it's all twisted. You know, this is, you get the standard, what you would expect, and then you can see how the Christian version is different, and that's the exciting thing.
but you can only tell they're different if you know a little bit about the standard narrative, or
that's right.
God struck me blind, the oracle told me I was a lousy slave trader.
And well, usually it's about being impure. You know, I did something that was impure. I went to the temple and was impure. I offered prayers and I was impure. That, if they give a reason, that's usually why. Purity is a big issue, even for Gentiles.
Okay, but if you know that narrative, you can see how what happens to Paul is different.
That's right.
You know, he's not told he's impure. He's kind of given a discipline, and eventually he is able to see, and he doesn't do anything to kind of earn his sight back. It's given to him gratis, and then he's kind of commissioned in divine service.
In fact, God sends someone to heal him. He doesn't even have to go to, like you would expect, you'd have to go to the temple of Asclepius, say, and spend the night in Asclepius, say, the temple, and you'd have this special dream where that God would tell you how to get healed. Doesn't even have to do anything, and no money required, because you have to pay, I think, to sleep in the temple of Asclepius. Asclepius is the god of healing, by the way.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's finish up with one thing. I don't know about you, but every now and again, I'll have a student who'll say, you know, Josephus Smophefus, this Dead Sea Scroll kind of stuff, they're dead, and I worship a living savior. I don't need a Dead Sea Scroll. I need the one true living God. You know, I've got the Holy Spirit. I don't need this William Ramsey or a bunch of dead German liberals telling me about some scratchings on a brick in a desert that I need to understand the New Testament. You know, I've got me, the Holy Spirit, and my NIV. What more do I need than that? Because it's you, scholars, in your little ivory towers and all your lexicography and your papyrology, if those are even words, telling us people that you are the arbiters of biblical truth, and you're kind of like a academic pope telling us with your technical big words stuff that mess with our simple biblical faith. Now, every now and again, I get someone who talks to me, not with quite an amount of sarcasm as that, but something on a similar lines. I don't need all that Bible background stuff. That's just elitist. It's esoteric academic nonsense. So when you come across something like that, I mean, you know, we did talk about, you need people to learn Greek, so you got the English Bible. But when someone says, papyri shmiri, I mean, what do you say when you hear something that the study of backgrounds is purely elitist?
I have had people say this to me too, or along those lines. Well, the thing wasn't written by individuals. The letters are written in company. You know, Paul sat with Silas and Timothy, and he wrote his letters. You know, he revised them. Obviously, I think it means when he says that Timothy and Silas and whoever else is co-writing, they co-write. So when because I like to emphasize with my research students that we're doing this in community together. So when we come to understanding interpretation of the Bible and how to translate, you know, the ancient texts and things like that, we're doing it in company. Um, and the company we're keeping stretches all the way back to Paul himself. Uh, you know, what the work that I'm doing is that standing on the shoulders of others who are standing on the shoulders of others, and so on and so forth, all the way back to church fathers who knew some of the earlier ones knew the apostles themselves. So it has never been a it has never been like this kind of elitist thing here. It's always been in company, always been scholars have always been working on the New Testament. I mean, one of my favorites is Clement of Alexandria.
He's a second or third century
Yeah,
church
that's
father.
right. Church father. Uh, he was a true scholar. You know, he he was doing stuff that I recognise. You know, we're in his interpretation of Paul's letters. My friend Edwina Murphy wrote her dissertation on Cyprian, is a third century church father, on his use of Paul in his letters and sermons, and how, you know, his focus was on the application of the biblical text to people's lives, and that's what I do too. You know, I'm just not hived off just studying ancient history and for the sake of studying ancient history and applying it in my little, what did you call, ivory tower. I'm engaged with a community of faith. Um, so it's all in conversation. And when I come to prepare a lecture for my students, when I come to preach at my church, when I discuss things in my Bible study group, and by the way, we're studying 1 Maccabees in my Bible study group. That was one of my friends' ideas. All of that is fuel for me to gain perspective on the text. So whatever I write and contribute, you know, it's been through the mill of community discussion, you know, like, and you know that I've seen you at conferences too. So we have these academic conferences where we test each other's ideas out. Like none of it occurs in a little ivory tower. It's all one in this huge conversation that we're having as a church.
So we just say to sum up, Lynn, that
I know I went on there a bit. Sorry, but
that's right. That's right. I'm just trying to sum it up in my own words. That these academic scholars are not in ivory towers. They're actually part of our churches and communities, and they're simply part of a historical continuity or a historical continuation of people who have been trying to understand the Bible in light of philosophy and history and language and literature. So there's just been a continuity where this has always been happening in the church. There's always been scholars like a Clement of Alexandria. There've been archaeologists like William Ramsey, and we even have, Lyn Kidson today at Alpha Crucis, teaching students about 1 Maccabees, and and how that can be useful for knowing about the New Testament and the world of Jesus and the apostles. Okay, that's
right.
That's wonderful.
Thank you for summing it up.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Well, the other thing the thing I tell students, it's like, okay, you want to study the Bible and you want to be directed by the Holy Spirit. And I tell them, well, how about this? If you do more historical study of the background, if you learn a bit of Greek, you learn some Hebrew, if you learn about some of these inscriptions, you read a little bit of the Dead Sea Scrolls, a bit of Josephus, read some of the church fathers. If you do all that, you will give the Holy Spirit more to work with in terms of helping you understand the New Testament.
So you know what? That's what I say to my students at Alpha Cruises. So Adam White and myself. Adam is also a graduate of Macquarie University. His PhD there. We've been working on integrating ancient sources and ancient background into our New Testament studies. So when it comes to writing their major essays, I say to them, think about what you've read and what you've learnt in lectures, and take the text and pray, and then read the text. And I try and get them to do this exercise of reading the text slowly, one verse at a time for a week, if that works, or 2 verses at a time, and then read the text again, the passage again, read through the whole letter, start to take notes on, what becomes important and apparent from, having digested all that background stuff. What then becomes apparent to you as you're reading the text. And, as you've done that, because you've prayed and asked God to illuminate, he will. And this is, all this kind of stuff, and this is my experience, I don't know, it's your experience, just kind of comes together. So you start to have these little moments of, oh, I'm seeing how this is working now. Did you have this, Mike?
Yeah, frequently. It's like,
Yeah.
are you reading something, in the New Testament, and that'll connect with a different part of the New Testament, or it may remind me something about, Josephus, or even, about, the word repentance. Repentance means not just be sorry for sins, it means to change your verdict about something. So when Josephus was up in the Galilee, getting ready for the Roman invasion, and he was having a little bit of an argument with some of the other people there about how best to run the defensive campaign, and there was a plot to kill him, and he got all the ringleaders together, and he told them to repent and believe in me. So change your verdict, your way of doing business, what you're planning to do, to give up your ideas of killing me and replacing me, and instead trust me in what I'm going to try to do for you people. So you just make these connections when you read stuff, or when you read a healing story in the Gospels that may think of something you've read in other literature, and you can see the differences or the similarities that just come out. Or you read something from the Dead Sea Scrolls where they talk about, the works of the law, or how to get rid of impurity. And you say, well,
Yes.
to get rid of impurity, you've got to go through all these rituals, where the Gospels, you see Jesus just lays hands and says, be clean. You're clean. So
Yeah.
I find it very rewarding and very illuminating, just because it enables you to see the New Testament world in 3D, and your mind is constantly making all these different connections that you're finding through all the various texts, traditions, and inscriptions and papyri, and all these little fragments and artifacts are just all suddenly cascading and being synthesized around you almost unconsciously as you're reading and teaching and preaching from the New Testament.
Yes. So I remember I had this experience at Corrie when a archaeologist called Angelos Chiantos, I think that's how you pronounce. He's Greek. His last name, sorry, can't. But he's a specialist in emotion in the Greco-Roman world, and I went and I went to a talk, and he was talking about emotion, and that's when I went, oh, because so I was struggling with what on earth the writer of 1 Timothy is trying to do, and I just suddenly had this vision, for want of a better word, or epiphany of that the emotional language that he uses, it uses quite sparingly, but when he does, what he's trying to do is cause his audience to have an emotional response. And so, when I was talking quite patiently about God's mercy and God's grace, when Paul's talking about that, he's reaching out through the letter, trying to make an emotional connection response in his audience. And I spent quite a bit of time in my thesis writing about that. But it was only when I went and heard Angelos talking about motion that I went, oh. So 1 Timothy, the letter, it has a rather plain, stark kind of tone to it. But these sprinkles of, emotional words that he uses where he's trying to get his audience to respond. And I think that's what happens, is that you have these little moments of epiphany about, when you hear about the background, when you understand, have these little insights in the background, and you see, oh, I see how the writer is trying to do what he's trying to do here, and it's very rewarding. And Van Hooser, who is a Christian philosopher who wrote about hermeneutics, at the end of his book, he says, trying to interpret the Bible is an exercise in love, because what you're trying to do is hear and understand what the writer on the other side of the page is trying to say. It's about them. It's not about me. It's not about what I think should be said in the text. It's about what they're trying to say to their audience. And I want to know what they're trying to say, because, in the end, we're called to love. And that's what should be driving your study of the Bible, because they're in their time, like I'm in my time. They have their culture, like I have my culture. They have their way of, their language, like I have my language. Their way of saying things, like I have my way of saying things. I've got to know what that is if I'm going to understand them and have empathy and see what God is saying through them.
Okay. Well, thanks, Lynn. That is probably a good note to end on. I've been talking to Lyn Kidson from Alpha Crucis, and we've been talking about the importance of background for understanding the New Testament, something I cover a bit in chapter 4 of 7 Things About the Bible I Wish All Christians
I
Knew.
commend that chapter to your viewers.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much, Lynn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.